The Nile River Valley of ancient Egypt was located in northern Africa from approximately 3500 BC to 500 BCE. As the name suggests, the society of ancient Egypt was located where Egypt now is in present day. However, back then, most of the population lived right next to the Nile River because the rest of Egypt was made up of harsh desert. It was basically unlivable. There were many different social classes in ancient Egypt. Pharaohs. The pharaohs were Egypt's supreme ruler. Pharaohs were believed to be gods, and their word was law. Government officials. Below the pharaohs was the next highest class in the social structure, the government officials. This class consisted of nobles and viziers, who carried out the orders of the pharaoh. They were high in power and enjoyed a high-quality life. Priests. Priests were a powerful group because the religion touched every part of people's daily lives. Priests were in charge of the temples and religious rituals. They also oversaw important ceremonies surrounding death and burials. Scribes. The scribe held a responsible part in the social structure. They recorded information for government and religious leaders. It took many years of schooling to become a scribe. Artisan. This group included craft people like carpenters, metal workers, painters, sculptors, and stone carvers. Artisans were highly skilled, but they had little social status. Peasants. Peasants were the largest social class. Peasants worked the land, providing the Egyptians with steady food supply. They were almost slaves. However, they were not always owned by somebody. When not working on the farms, they would work on Pharaoh's massive building projects. The pyramids. The ancient Egyptians believed in several gods and goddesses. The most important god was the sun god Re or Ra. People prayed to him for good harvests. The most famous goddess was Isis, who was seen as the ideal mother and wife. Her husband Osiris was the ruler of the dead. Most Egyptians prayed at home. The gods and goddesses were said to live in great temples. One of the most famous temples is in Karnak. It consists of over 130 columns that are 25 meters high. It is a very large temple. The Egyptians believed in life after death. They preserved people and mummies so that their bodies would not decay. These mummies were then put into tombs or graves. Clothing, food, and other items in their daily life were also put into the grave because a dead person might need them in their afterlife. Pictures of their daily life were painted on the walls of such graves. The Egyptians were sophisticated in their technology and weapons. They used bows and arrows, slings, composite bows, battle axes, and shields. Their armies consisted of people who specialized in those specific weapons. Ancient Egyptians were very close to water, so naturally, in regards to transportation, they used many types of ships to travel quickly between Upper and Lower Egypt, as well as for trade. Early Egyptians learned to make small boats out of the papyrus plant. They were easy to instruct and worked well for fishing and short trips. Most of the papyrus boats were small and were steered with oars and poles. The typical boat was long and thin, and the ends came to a point that stuck out of the water. Eventually, the Egyptians began to make boats from wood. They used acacia wood from Egypt and imported cedar wood from Lebanon. They also began to use giant sail in the middle of the boat so they could catch the wind when heading upstream. The Egyptians built their wooden boats without nails. Boats were often made from a number of short planks that were hooked together and tied tight with ropes. Steering was accomplished by using a large rudder oar at the back of the ship. The Egyptians learned how to build large and sturdy cargo ships. They sailed these up and down the Nile and into the Mediterranean Sea to trade with other countries. These ships could hold lots of cargo. Some ships were used to carry huge stones weighing as much as 500 tons from the rock quarry to where the pyramids were being constructed to where they needed them to be. The Egyptians believed that a boat was also needed in the afterlife in order to journey to the heavens. Sometimes a small model of a boat was buried with a person. Oftentimes, a full-size boat was included in the tombs of pharaohs and other wealthy Egyptians. There were 35 boats of some type in the pharaoh Tut's tomb. Ancient Egyptians didn't just travel by boat. If they were wealthier or royal, they would travel by cart or in chariots, which were pulled by horses or donkeys. Carts and chariots, however, were mostly uncommon among the population. On land, most ancient Egyptians traveled on foot to their desired locations. Egypt relied on trade more than any other civilization because the land had few natural resources other than the Nile River. Some trade between Nubia and Egypt took place at about 4000 BCE. Later on, trade was quite regular between the two areas. An extreme amount of ivory, ebony, leopard skins, ostrich feathers, gemstones, gold, and slaves all went down the Nile in exchange for pottery, wine, honey, and other products from Egypt. Some of the most prized objects exported from Egypt were the fine linens, textiles, woven from flax. Trade kept together the societies of Egypt and Nubia even when there were complications. Egyptians traded with Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE and throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The trade between Egypt and Mesopotamia sometimes included extremely large transfers of goods. For example, almost all wood that was used by Egyptians came from Mesopotamia, because Egypt lacked the large amount of foliage. Hieroglyphics were, as far as we know, exclusively used on stone monuments and in tombs. In their daily work, scribes used another kind of writing, called hieratic. This uses a cursive script which was far quicker and easier to use than hieroglyphics. Hieratic writing was always written from right to left, usually in horizontal rows. Later, around 500 BC, and therefore towards the end of the ancient Egyptian civilization, a new form of writing, demotic, came into widespread use. This was a phonetic, semi-alphabetical script, which began life as a transcription of well-known Rosetta Stone, which originates from a large block of stone that had many hieroglyphics all around it. It was finally translated years later through much difficulty. Usually, when ancient Egypt is talked about in regards to architecture, the main point of the conversation is the pyramids. During the period known as the Old Kingdom, 2686 BCE to 2181 BCE, architecture developed in an increased rate, and some of the most famous monuments in Egypt, such as the Pyramid and the Great Sphinx at Giza, were constructed. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, also known as the Great Pyramid of Cheops, was the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which was constructed in 2528 BCE. Much of the ancient Egyptians' art was created from materials that were available due to their proximity to the Nile River. Locally available materials included limestone, which was plentiful at the Nile River Valley, as well as sandstone and calcite. These soft materials were easy to carve and were used to create reliefs for temples and statues. The Nile River also made trade routes possible that allowed Egyptians access to materials such as cedar from Syria and tin from multiple places across the Far East. Wood was used to create sarcophagi and carvings, and tin was used to make jewelry and decorative plates.